Sunday evening we did an introduction to the book of Zephaniah, and we also looked at chapter 1. Zephaniah is the prophet of judgment. You remember that, and a key phrase that we find in the book of Zephaniah that helps him stand out and kind of earn that title as a prophet of judgment, because all the prophets, they go and they preach judgment, but the key phrase that stands out in the book of Zephaniah is what? 18. It's in verse 18. The day of the Lord, the day of the wrath of the Lord, both those phrases are key to the book of Zephaniah, because the day of the Lord refers to what?
I think coming of Christ, the end of time.
Well, it would be before then, right? Because he says that this is coming upon them. We do use this phrase whenever we talk about the coming of Christ. Paul uses this phrase when talking about the coming of Christ in the book of 1 Thessalonians. And the reason why Paul uses this phrase in 1 Thessalonians is because when Christ comes, there's going to be what? Judgment. And so when we look in the Old Testament, whenever he says that the day of the wrath of the Lord, or the day of the Lord is coming upon them, or it's going to ensue soon, it means that judgment is going to fall upon them. So key phrase is the day of the Lord. Key thought is judgment is coming upon you. But like many of the minor prophets we've looked at so far, whenever it begins with a word about judgment, whenever it begins with gloom, how does it usually end? On a good note or a bad note? It ends with hope, typically. Typically, these books are going to end with hope, and that's what we're going to see here at the close of our study this evening. Chapter 1, when we looked at it, was talking about the judgment that's going to come upon Judah. And one of the main points that God was making, especially making in verse 18, is that they are not going to be able to evade the judgment. There's nothing that they're going to be able to do out of their own fruits that is going to cause them or enable them to stand and watch as God judges and not be participants in that judgment as well. And so chapter 1 really talks about how Judah is going to be judged. And chapter 2, we're going to get into the reason why they're going to be judged. You can see the chapter point here is that Nineveh and Judah rejoice in the wrong things. They rejoice in the wrong things. And so we're going to be talking about some of those things here in chapter 2. But before we talk about that, what do you notice about just this association? Nineveh and Judah rejoice in the wrong things. Should it have been like that? No. Why?
Judah is the Lord's people.
Yeah, Judah is the Lord's people. Judah is supposed to be a holy nation. They're supposed to be examples. Leviticus 19 and verse 2, they're to be holy as the Lord is holy. God had chosen them to be His holy people, a priesthood to all the world, so that all the world could see holiness. But if Nineveh and Judah are rejoicing in the same things, and this is written around the same time that Nahum had written, and Nahum preached about the judgment that's coming upon Nineveh, it tells us that Nineveh and Judah are both worldly. They're both pagan. They've both turned away. And that right there is something for us to think about whenever we think about what sort of associations do we bring off. Do we present ourselves as people who are associated with the world? James chapter 4 and verse 4, he says that friendship with the world is enmity with God. And not only that, but in the beginning of the verse, he says, whenever he's talking about these people that have that friendship with the world, that friendship with worldly passions, that share in the same desires of the flesh as the pagan do, he says, you are adulterous people. Adulterous people. And so we don't want to be that. And so just looking here at the chapter point, we see a great lesson, or perhaps a great reminder to always be thinking about what sort of association is seen. Because when we talk about these things that Judah is guilty of, this isn't all internal stuff. Some of this is external. Some of this is what the nations are going to see. And so, with that being said, let's go ahead and let's just begin with this chapter. Verses 1 and 2, you have a call for repentance. Verses 1 and 2, you have a call for repentance. It says, gather together, yes, gather, O shameless nation, before the decree takes effect, before the day passes away like chaff, before there comes upon you a burning anger of the Lord, before there come upon you the day of the anger of the Lord. So verses 1 and 2 is a call to repent. And he begins it with saying, gather together. Does that remind you of a book that we have looked at so far in our Minor Prophets study? It's towards the start. The book of Joel. Think about the book of Joel. Joel chapter 1 and verse 14. Joel said to consecrate a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord our God, and cry out to the Lord. So there was supposed to be an urgency in turning to Him. So we come back to Zephaniah chapter 2. Zephaniah is telling them that they need to make an urgent change. This is urgent. You need to come. You need to gather together. And one of the things he calls them is what? Verse 1. Shameless nation. You want to talk about ways to destroy a nation? You want to talk about ways to destroy your own spiritual life, to make shipwreck your faith? Be a shameless person. Have no shame about you. And Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 15, Jeremiah talked about the people in his day, which this is contemporary with the book of Zephaniah. He says that one of their faults, one of the reasons why they were declining so fast, is because they didn't even blush at their own sin. They were a shameless people in the sense that they had no shame for the things that they would do. And so verse 1, you need to make a rapid change. You shameless people. You've been living an adulterous life. You've been living a godless life, and you don't even care about it. It's time for you to wake up and make some changes. And he tells them to do so because evidently, verse 2, there's still a moment in which their repentance would be rewarded with God relenting His judgment. He says, before there comes upon you the burning anger of the Lord. And so the idea here is if you make a change, if you make a change, then everything can be all right. You're not going to receive this rapid horrible destruction that's been preached to you for years and years and years. Instead, you're going to receive the glory side of it. You're going to receive the riches. You're going to receive blessings. You're going to see blessings for your good behavior, for your obedience to God. That's something that Moses spoke about in Deuteronomy chapter 32. Obedience is met with blessings. That's a biblical principle. And here in verse 2, we see that they still have an opportunity. They have an opportunity to repent or perish. Much like kind of Jesus preached to His own people in Luke chapter 13 and verse 3. Let's continue here. Verses 3 through 15, you have an appeal for action. An appeal for action. You need to make change, verses 1 and 2. You need to make it fast, and this is how you're going to do it, verse 3. Let's look here at verses 3 and 4. It says, seek the Lord, you humble of the land, who do His just commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the anger of the Lord. Okay. So what things does Zephaniah say? Okay, if you're going to make the change, this is how you make it. What things does he list out here? Righteousness, humility. Above that, seek who? Seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. Why did Israel, or why did Judah have a problem with righteousness? Because they didn't seek the Lord. Why did Israel have a problem with humility? Because they didn't seek the Lord. If they had sought the Lord, if they sought the Lord as they're commanded to with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their mind, with all their strength, then they wouldn't have come across these issues. They wouldn't be standing before God with the potential of judgment hanging over their heads. They wouldn't be hearing the words of a prophet saying, "You shameless people." They wouldn't be hearing a prophet say, "You need to seek these things." If they were already abiding in these things, the narrative would be entirely different. But they weren't abiding in these things because they weren't abiding with God. They weren't seeking Him out. Verse 4, it says, "For..."
A question.
Yes, sir.
I see he's talking to people talking to seek the Lord, but he's talking about all you that are humble in the land and those that are doing His commands. Worded to do His command. They don't read into what's not there.
Right.
And then go back to down to seek righteousness and humility, but he's already talking about that all you that are humble of the land. And it's talking about two different people here, groups of people, or is he talking about those that are doing the commands of God, or those that need to seek righteousness and seek humility?
So verse 3, maybe the way I'm looking at it here is the call is to seek the Lord, right? And whenever he mentions all you humble of the land who do His just commands, he's, number one, encouraging those who are doing the right thing to continue to do the right thing, and encouraging, number two, those who are doing the wrong thing to go ahead and do the right thing. I think that might be what it is, or maybe it's an appeal for those who are doing the right thing to not only be leaders by example, but also leaders by word, to actually go out and encourage other people to do the same thing, maybe.
I kind of read it that they'll be protected, because it says, "It may be that you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger," those who do that. So I'm reading
those that seek righteousness and seek humility
are going to be protected.
But you haven't talked, but the very first part of it, all of you humble of the land, like there's some that are already humble of the land, and those that are doing His commands, like you said, I see that group there. Then it says, seek righteousness, seek humility. Those that aren't doing that need to do this. Then they would be hidden against the anger of the Lord.
Right. In a way, it's kind of the same promise as given to Christians, right? The promise given to Christians is that if you abide in Him, you're going to go and dwell with Him. You're not going to experience the second death, the spiritual death. You're not going to be cast into hell, those sorts of things. And so it's kind of perhaps the same sort of thing there. Kind of reminds me of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, where Paul talks about the outpouring of wrath that would fall upon the unrighteous. And in that, he talks about the people who are going to experience that wrath as those who do not know God and those who do not obey God. But he encourages them afterward, here's what could happen to you. Now make the change so it doesn't happen to you. If you do make the change, it's not going to happen to you. And so maybe in verse 3, the way that we can look at it is that there's an overall encouragement to seek the Lord. If you're doing it, keep doing it. Don't give up just because you hear my message and you think, oh, well, Babylonians are coming regardless. What's the point? So many people, whenever they have a threat on the horizon, they've been doing the right thing. They realize that, or so they perceive that their efforts have been in vain. They just say, well, what's the point? That was the whole problem in the book of Hebrews. That's why the Hebrew writer had to write and encourage the brethren there, because they had been doing the right things, but they'd been treated bad for doing the right things. And so they said, well, what's the point anymore? And so the Hebrew writer encourages them to stay on track. And so maybe that's what's going on here. And then there is the kind of the command for those you haven't been seeking the Lord. Seek Him.
One other thought maybe too, they may just be going through the motions. And so that there is an admonition, seek ye the Lord. All of you that are meek and have worked His judgments, He's telling them, seek righteousness, seek meekness. Maybe, you shall be hid in the day of the Lord. So it might just be they've been going through the motions, but they're not with Him as well. Just as far as you need to really be thinking about Him, seeking Him, and to do those things. I'm not saying it's not the others as well. It's just a possibility of, hey, yeah, you've been doing good, but they're not really with me. I don't know.
Right. I mean, you could see that in Zephaniah chapter 1 and verse 5. He talks about those who are given over to idolatry, but he also says those who bow down and swear to the Lord. They're doing the things, right?
Yeah.
They're going through the emotions, but their heart isn't there.
Just maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's validity to that. So, any other questions, comments? Okay, verse 4 through 7, we see here desolation of the nations. You could look at it here. He goes through a number of nations here. It says, "For Gaza shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become a desolation. Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. Woe to you, inhabitants of the sea coast, you nation of Cherethites! The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines. I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left. And you, O sea coast, shall be pastures, with meadows for shepherds, and folds for flocks. The sea coast shall become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah, on which they shall graze, and in the houses of Ashkelon they shall lie down at evening. For the Lord their God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes." Verse 3 and verses 4 through 7, I think, tie together in this way. Zephaniah encourages them in verse 3 to turn away from perhaps what they have been doing, ultimately to seek the Lord, to seek righteousness, to seek humility, and in doing so, you're going to be hidden from this judgment. And now understand, verses 4 through 7, I think he's saying, now understand, this judgment is real. This judgment is not only a threat to you, but it's a threat to everyone around you. It's going to be total devastation. And so there should be no reservation about you that says, maybe I will, maybe I won't. You should be fully committed to seeking the Lord at this point, because he goes through all these different cities, all these different nations, and talks about how they are going to be utterly obliterated. And then he talks about in verse 7 that the seacoast is going to become a possession of the remnant of the house of Judah. And so kind of, if you think about it this way, verse 3, he's saying you need to make change so that you can escape this judgment. Verses 4 through 6, he's saying this judgment is real. And verse 7, he's saying, oh, by the way, so you have obeyed my voice, you have done the things I've told you to, you have escaped the judgment, you're going to receive a reward. You're going to inhabit this land. And he says that the Lord God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes. We see the same sort of message there in Joel chapter 2, that God is going to restore to them the years the locusts have eaten. Joel chapter 2 and verse 14. Verses 8 and following here. Let's go 8 through 11. "I have heard the taunts of Moab and the revilings of the Ammonites, how they have taunted my people and made boast against their territory. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Moab shall become like Sodom and the Ammonites like Gomorrah, a land possessed by nettles and salt pits, and a waste forever. The remnant of my people shall plunder them, and the survivors of my nation shall possess them. This shall be their lot in return for their pride, because they taunted and boasted against the people of the Lord's hosts. The Lord will be awesome against them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth. To him shall bow down each in its place, all the lands of the nations." Verses 8 and following, you have kind of the same message as what we saw in verses 4 through 7. And that is that the threat of God's judgment is very real. The threat of God's judgment is devastating. And that it is going to be poured out upon the nations. And this should be kind of just pounding in their heads right now, as Zephaniah is saying this, as Zephaniah goes through all these different nations, and he even mentions nations that are prideful. It should be pounding their heads right now. We're on the same level of association. We have the same amount of guilt, because he has to go through all these nations. He has to list off all these people that they're like in order for them to snap back to reality. The sad thing is that they don't snap back into reality. They just listen to him and they go on about their business. This should snap them back to reality. I mean, you think about it in terms like this. The way he's kind of putting it is, you have someone who might lie a little bit, right? You have someone who might lie a little bit. We know lying's a sin, but sometimes we want to play it down. It's a sin, but it's not a big deal, right? How would it make you feel if someone was talking to you about your lying problem, and you were saying, "Well, I don't think it's a big deal"? Well, do you know God puts it on the same level as homosexuality? Do you know God puts it on the same level as bestiality? Do you know that God puts it on the same level as a murderer? Do you know that God, and you go through the list, that ought to make you think about your sin and snap you back into reality, right? You would think that any reasonable person, if it was brought down to them in that sort of this sort of instruction, they would catch on to it. But they don't, because they're not seeking the Lord. They're not seeking the Lord. They don't care about righteousness. They don't care about it. Let's continue verse 12. You also, O Cushites, shall be slain by my sword. Interesting here. I have a note in my Bible under my sword. You can put my word. And I say this because he talks earlier about how in verse 5 he says, the word of the Lord is against you. Then he says, you're going to be struck down. You're going to be slain by my sword. You're going to be slain by my word. John 12 and verse 48, Jesus says that his word is the final judge. His word is what's going to decide whether or not someone spends eternity in heaven or someone spends eternity in hell. His word is the standard. His word is everything that it goes by. His word is a sword. And so verse 12, O you Cushites shall be slain by my sword. Verse 13, and he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and he will make Nineveh a desolation, a dry waste like the desert. Herds shall lie down in her midst, all kinds of beasts, even the owl and the hedgehog shall lodge in her capitals. A voice shall hoot in the window. Devastation will be on the threshold, for her cedar work will be laid bare. This is the exultant city that lives securely, that said in her heart, I am, and there is no one else. What a desolation she has become, a lair of wild beasts. Everyone who passes by her hisses and shakes his fist. Verses 13 through 15, he's putting it now on the same level as the Ninevites, those in Judah have survived. The Ninevites, the Assyrians, they came, they tried to conquer Judah. Well, they failed in conquering Judah. They succeeded in conquering Israel in 722 BC. But they failed in conquering Judah because of the humility of, I believe, King Hezekiah. And so King Hezekiah's humility, his prayer, allowed for God to withhold the hand of judgment by the way of the Assyrians upon those in Judah. But nonetheless, Nineveh, Assyria, was a glaring example of sinfulness to them. This is kind of like, I don't know, you put it on the same level as Las Vegas, maybe? I mean, if someone were to tell me that the judgment of God is going to take, I don't know, Los Angeles or New York City, just take a vibrant city that with all the lights, all the activity, all the artwork, everything like that, and say, he's going to lay it bare. And he's going to do it so because their sins. I mean, that's the same sort of comparison he's drawing here with Nineveh. God's going to lay it bare. Whenever we talked about the book of Micah, I want to say it was. Maybe it was Habakkuk. I'm not sure, but me and Roger, I think it was named me and Roger were talking about the walls of the city afterwards, and it's amazing how big and high the walls were. That's not a symbol of a destitute country, right? That's a symbol of a vibrant country. That is something you see with a well-secure country. And that's the country that Zephaniah is talking about here. This greatly secured country, this vibrant place to live, is going to become a desolation. You know who's going to be living there? Wild beasts. You know who's going to be in the window pane? It ain't going to be the king looking down on you. It's not going to be the king of Nineveh looking down upon his people. It's going to be Al hooting. That is desolation, total desolation, and it's by the hand of God. And really, I think the warning here in chapter 2 is that you are guilty of the same things. These are what I'm going to do to the nations. You can use your imagination and decide whether or not you think I will do those to you. And God ends up having to do those things to them. Let's look here in chapter 3. Well, we still have, 12 minutes maybe. Chapter 3. The chapter title is Doom Awaits Those Who Rise Up Early to Engage in Sin. Doom awaits those who rise up early to engage in sin. Let's look here at verses 1 through 5. This is judgment upon Jerusalem and the nations again. It says in verse 1, Woe to her who is rebellious and defiled, the oppressing city. She listens to no voice. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. Her officials within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves that leave nothing till the morning. Verse 4, her prophets are fickle, treacherous men. Her priests profane what is holy. They do violence to the law. The Lord within her is righteous. He does no injustice. Every morning he shows forth his justice. Each dawn he does not fail, but the unjust shows no shame. Verses 1 through 5, we're talking here about Jerusalem. We're talking about Jerusalem. We're talking about the faults of Jerusalem. What are some of the things that you notice in these first 5 verses about Jerusalem?
He trusted not in the Lord.
Yeah, they don't trust in the Lord. They don't trust in the Lord. What's another thing you notice?
Rebellious.
They're rebellious. That's the first thing the prophet says in this chapter about them. Woe to her who is rebellious. They're rebellious. They don't want anything to do with God. Jeremiah 6 and verse 10, they counted the word of God as an object of scorn. Jeremiah 6 and verse 14, the people are told to stand by the ancient ways and ask where the good paths are and then to walk in it. And they said, we will not walk. Jeremiah 6 and verse 15, they're told to stop and listen for the sound of the horn. And they say, we will not listen. They don't want anything to do with it. They're a rebellious child. They have been given instruction that is good for them. And they said, no, we want to do it our way. We want to do it our way. And sometimes, whenever we want to do it our way, it costs us a whole lot. It costs us a whole lot. And this is something that Judah is going to learn here.
Stop and look at this and think about it. We can put ourselves in this same, our country in the same condition.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on the election, it could be worse than what we're seeing right now. We need to stop thinking, as we read these things, how does it apply to us, or what kind of situations are we in, or what? We need to look closer home here when we study it, because all this is written back then, but it applies today.
Absolutely. I think we need to be thinking about ourselves. We need to be thinking about
our rulers, our officials, our country.
Yeah, our country,
judges, our stuff like that.
Our local congregations. All of this kind of give us something to think about here. Are we a rebellious people? He says, the second thing he says about them is that they're defiled. Are we a defiled people? Are we people with spots, with blemishes? You know, things with spots and blemishes, that wasn't acceptable to God. Leviticus chapter 1, you have the offering for sin there. It's a young lamb, 1 year old, and it's supposed to be without blemish or spot. Are we people who are spotted? Are we blemished? Are we defiled by the world? Something else, some other things we see. Verse 2, you kind of see the rebelliousness laid out, kind of rebelliousness that kind of grows into fruition, into stubbornness. She listens to no voice, accepts no correction, does not trust, does not draw near, just wants nothing to do with God. Absolutely nothing to do with God. Verse 3, you talk about the officials and, with imagery like lions and wolves, and the fact that they leave nothing until the morning, tell us that they're seeking to devour one another. They're seeking to devour their own people. That speaks to their oppression. Now you see in verse 1, the oppressing city, Zephaniah says, they're oppressive. Verse 4, you look at the prophets, they're fickle. They ain't going to tell you the truth. They're going to lean whatever way people want them to lean. Oh, you want me to recant my statements on this? Okay, I'll do it. They're fickle. They have no true convictions. They're treacherous men. They're leading people. I mean, think about this here. In Zephaniah's day, under Judaism, the priests who are fickle, who are treacherous, they were leading people to a physical death. The reason why God has to send a prophet to go and speak to a whole entire people is because the small group within that people, those people who are entrusted to teach, those people who are entrusted to lead, they're not holding up their responsibility. They're leading people to their death. That should make us think, man. I know, if the eldership here makes a bad decision or whatever, it's not going to necessarily lead us to a physical death, right? But it'll lead us to a spiritual death. But sometimes it's hard for us to notice the severity of that. To notice the severity of that, that's why we look to the Old Testament. The Old Testament tells you the severity of judgment and puts it in terms we can understand. It's blood. The judgment is loss of life. It is discontinued fellowship with God. And so those are some things to think about. Verse 4, he also says that the priests, they profane what is holy. It's kind of like what was going on in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Remember, they were partaking the Lord's Supper. Paul says that they had made vain what is holy. And talking about turning the Lord's Supper into their own supper. And holding people out from eating with them and partaking in those emblems. It says that they do violence to the law. I don't think that means exactly what we would think. We would think now, they do violence to the law. We would think of people who are hurting police officers and stuff like that. I don't think that's what was going on there. I think what it's talking about is they teach the law, the Word of God, in such a way that it's harmful. It's almost better for people to never heard it before than to hear it the way they're saying it. Verse 5, the Lord, however, He's righteous. He's within her. He does not do injustice. Everything He's doing is just. Each day He tries, and but the unjust, they just don't want anything to do with Him. Each day He makes an attempt to save them, to help them, and they say, we don't want them. Verse 6 through 8, a word to the city. I have cut off nations, their battlements are in ruins. I have laid waste their streets so that no one walks in them. Their cities have been made desolate, without a man, without an inhabitant. I said, surely you will fear me. You will accept correction. Then your dwelling would not be cut off according to all that I have appointed against you. But all the more they were eager to make all their deeds corrupt. Verse 8, therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up to seize the prey. For my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all my burning anger. For in the fire of my jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed. Verse 6 and 7, God saying, I've done everything so that y'all would just turn to me. So y'all would see my power. You would see the power of my judgment, and you would come to me. You would follow me. You would obey me, so that I wouldn't have to pour out this judgment upon you. But in all of that, in everything I've done, your final response has been, I don't care. I don't want it. It doesn't matter. That's been your final response. And so since it doesn't matter, since you don't care, just wait till I get there, he says in verse 8. Whenever I get there, judgment is coming out. It's going to be poured out. Let's look here at verses 9 through 13. The glorious day for Judah. For at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, the daughters of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering. On that day you shall not be put to shame because of the deeds by which you have rebelled against me. For then I will remove from you out of the midst your proudly exalted ones, and you shall no longer be haughty in the holy mountain. But I will leave in your midst a people humble and lowly. They shall seek refuge in the name of the Lord. And those who are left in Israel, they do no injustice and speak no lies, nor shall there be found in their mouth a deceitful tongue. For they shall graze and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Verses 9 through 13 are a messianic promise. Anytime, for instance, you look at verse 11, it starts with on that day. Anytime you see that in the Old Testament, you need to be thinking church. You need to be thinking Messianic age. On that day. Look at the people that God says he's going to establish. On that day, I'm going to establish, I'm going to leave in your midst people who are humble. They're lowly. People who seek refuge in the name of the Lord. They are those who are left in Israel. They are a small group. They are deserted. They are outcasts. Verse 13, they do no injustice. Why is that? Because they do what's right. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 19. 1 John 1 verses 9 and 10. And so on and so forth. They speak no lies. They're honest people. Honest people. Ephesians 4 and verse 29. They don't speak any lies. Nor shall there be found in their mouth a deceitful tongue. Colossians 4 and verse 6. Let your speech be seasoned, salted with grace. For they shall graze and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. What does that remind you of? That last bit. For they shall graze and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Psalm 23. And whenever we think about Psalm 23, where should our minds go? John chapter 10. I am the good shepherd. My sheep, they know my voice. I will lay down my life for my sheep. All those things. Think Messianic when you hear those phrases. We're technically out of time. Alrighty. We'll finish this up Sunday evening. And then we'll also be doing the book of Haggai on Sunday evening.
Cody, I have a question.
Yes, sir?
Maybe I misheard or misunderstood something that said towards the beginning of the class about judgment. In front of judgment people here. And I thought the question or the statement said is, what's going to happen here before Christ returns? And somebody said, the judgment. Did I mishear that? I thought Christ was coming to make judgment, not judgment to be made before he came.
Did I say that?
He's talking about the day of the Lord.
Yeah, when you're
He said he was coming Christ. You said it's not the coming of Christ into the world, although that is judgment. Whatever that phrase is used in the Old Testament, that's God pronouncing judgment on a country or place or something. The day of the Lord representing judgment coming.
Yeah.
In this case, it's judgment coming by punishment from another nation, not Christ coming.
I just thought the statement said, what's going to happen before Christ returns. And I was thinking of final days, when Christ does it. I understand what you said, and I just misunderstood that.
Sir.